Is Florida the most vulnerable team, given the fact that they were the team that really, I guess Auburn was down a lot, but Florida probably should have lost two games, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting the two games they should have lost were on the short prep games. So now they've got the long prep and obviously scheme familiarity with Auburn. And but yeah, there's absolutely no reason they should have won that Texas Tech game. Two missed front ends, back-to-back three-pointers. Uh, it just and then a couple other miracle shots that buried the Raiders. But the I don't necessarily think they're the most vulnerable just because they've obviously played Auburn. They won at Auburn. They have a ton of scheme familiarity there. And they did double up Auburn in 3-point production that game, but it was mostly born from their ability to exploit and use Auburn's aggressive perimeter defense, the way they weak the ball screen or ice the ball screen. They started just back cutting them to death. So Auburn actually got out of their typical defense, went into drop coverage, and when you drop against Florida, they eat you alive. And that's exactly what they did. I think Florida ended up having 16 uncontested catch and shoots that game, which is the most Auburn has given up all year. Gave up 1.22 points per possession at Neville, which is pretty unheard of. And that was when Auburn was really clicking. They kind of went into a funk at the end of the year. But when Florida won that game at Auburn, Auburn was at the pretty much the peak of their powers. And yeah, Florida just took it to them. So I think there's a lot that Golden and his staff have really noticed how to the way they back cut them to death and force them into drop coverage just to protect against the rim is something that no other team has done to Auburn this year. And I just think Florida has their scheme pretty much well scouted.
So you think that this line move then, which started, I think, with Florida opened what 3.5 and has gone down to two. You think that that's a, a the wrong move?
I do, and obviously we don't know Broom's total health status, but I would assume he's going to play no matter what. And Golden always goes one-on-one in the post. Like that's just a program tenet from his Randy Bennett days. Uh, and they're gonna, Broom had like an inefficient, I think 18 points on 19 shots in that first meeting. And they're just, he might get 20, 25, 30, 35, but they're going to completely take away the 3-point line from Auburn. And meanwhile, they outproduced them from three in the first game simply because of the way they spaced the floor and used their bigs. Um, and yeah, I like Florida.
Who's the better coach there, Pearl or Golden?
I think right now I would take Golden because he's, I think, got a higher ceiling. Obviously, he's much younger, and he has proven his ability to, like I mentioned earlier, totally manipulate the portal. And I was a little concerned the way they kind of got out schemed against UConn and also Texas Tech, but the way those two teams use their bigs and their screening actions, they really space the floor extremely well with their size, and like Darian Williams, particularly with Texas Tech. And that's something Florida's bigs have kind of struggled with all year, like chasing teams that spread the floor off ball screening, which UConn is, the gold standard of that. And so that was kind of exploited on short prep in both games. Auburn uses their bigs in a lot of screening action, but it's a lot of compact flex cut and flex screen action. And that's something that they really scouted well that first meeting. And it's not something where Condon and Haug have to chase Broom or Cardwell out to the perimeter. Like Broom will go out there, but it's not something that's such a big part of their offensive game plan. And that's where Florida's defense has been by far the most vulnerable, when you get those guys chasing in screens and get them involved in that kind of screening action, which Auburn plays way more in the paint with the more compact flex offense.
When let's move to the other game. When that line popped, Duke 4.5 over Houston, I was shocked. I thought for certain, like because of all of this momentum that Duke had, that that line would be bigger, and it's moved up to 5. But am I wrong in thinking that this is like at this point the Duke Invitational, and that like that line is short, and anything under like 8 points right now against any of these teams is short with Duke?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of similarities to last year's UConn team with this Duke team, where you just couldn't set the line high enough, and even like when you look at their shot diet and kind of analytical backbone, it's almost identical as well. Like Duke just creates a ton of open jump shots, 99th percentile in unguarded catch and shoot rate, which is exactly like UConn last year, 99th percentile in off ball screen rate, just like UConn last year. It's just they have I Malwatch isn't close to Klingon in terms of his rim protection, but he's evolving towards that as the season has progressed, and it's a lot of parallels to that UConn team. Of course, this one is interesting because they played last year in the Sweet 16, Duke and Houston, and it was one of the ugliest grinder games of the tournament, of any recent tournament. I think 56 possessions. No team really even sniffed 1 point per possession in that game. And of course, Jamal Shed got hurt, which, a lot of Houston fans have been, that was kind of their, big what if game. And they didn't have JoJo Tugler as well, who was injured before the tournament. So that, there's a lot of kind of, emotional or non on the court stuff support for Houston, where it's kind of, oh, this team's going to get them now because they had their chance last year and didn't do it. And, obviously Duke is better this year. They have the best player in the country playing for them, and it's a totally different team. They're bigger across the board, and they're just set up so well to beat Houston's defense, which is so predicated on sending two to the ball, no matter where the ball is, in the ball screen or the post. And when you do that against Duke, you're setting up a horrible numbers disadvantage for yourself. You're going to be weak on the weak side, which is where Duke creates that 99th percentile uncontested catch and shoot rate. They're 98th percentile, I believe, when you trap the ball screen, scoring out of ball screen traps, and 99th percentile efficiency wise, scoring out of post doubles. So those are the two areas that Houston's defense is built on. And, that's a small sample size for Duke because not a lot of teams are going to do that to them, just because you're going to get torched if you do. And so Houston's going to try it, that's the scheme they're married to, the monster post double and the ball screen blitz and trap and the aggressive high hedge. And those are just defenses that Duke has decimated this entire season. So, the argument for Houston would be that their Duke has played in, the extremely weakened and watered down ACC, and they haven't really faced someone who's going to bring this kind of physicality and ball pressure to them. And they're going to, try to ugly up the game in the same way they did last year. But Duke is just far more equipped to hit that short roll with flag or post up flag or do whatever you put flag in the ball screen. They have so many variations of their ball screen. It's, insane. And that Houston defense is also very vulnerable when you go from the pick and roll and flow into this kind of screen rescreen action that Duke runs. And they just they're so scrambled defensively with two on the ball, no matter where it is, that there's just wide open jump shots to be had. And Duke is just much bigger this year as well, and they can see over those traps and blitzes and, hit the short roller, and they're just as equipped as anyone could possibly be to beat this Houston defense.
I think it's really interesting. I mean, just your dissection of the matchups and kind of the stuff that isn't going to really appear in, your standard models. And so,
yeah, thanks. That's kind of
food for thought.
Why thank you. That's why I kind of started my site in general, because I didn't see necessarily a lot of the things that I found interesting in that kind of space, talking about matchups. So, I thought I'd just start jotting it down and see where it goes.
It's like the why, right? It's like, why is this team creating open 3-point looks in this game? Like we can say, okay, these are really efficient shots. Everybody should try, be shooting these shots. But how do you get them?
Yeah,
Like,
that's exactly right. That's what I find interesting about it. A lot of anybody can kind of just, scroll through the analytics and, you know, look at the data in that way and how that, matches up just face to face on its face. But yeah, I like to see where it's coming from and how it's being created.
Bet the process.